Not all heroes wear capes.
Some heroes ride roller coasters. Welcome to Crash, the technology podcast about everything else. Today, would you take money to train the thing that might end up replacing you? Ukraine's President Zelensky takes the money to train the UK in techno warfare, and Twitter founder Jack Dorsey pays the money to bring Vine back from the dead. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stoker-Walker.
How is married life? You got married. So for those who don't listen every week, Chris got married at the weekend. Well, we deliberately haven't spoken about it, so that if it's all gone to shit now.
Did I get married at the weekend?
You'll never believe what happened next.
No, I did. There you go. There's a ring on my finger. So we made our own rings. I mean, that sounds much more impressive than it is, because you get a little bar of metal and then you hammer it a little bit and then the person actually shapes it for you and then you drop it into some liquid that casts it or whatever, and then you do a little bit of polishing and stuff like that. So yeah, I could say I made it, but I didn't really make it.
Was it beautiful and lovely? I haven't even seen any photos yet. That's how professional we are, making sure that everything we talk about is on the record at all times.
You know what? It genuinely was, actually. And I will, I will forward you a couple of photos so you can live react to them. So one will be me and my now wife, Angelica. We have a lovely ceremony in a building called the Common Room in Newcastle. It's a great advertisement, actually, for Newcastle. I think we have an amazing vision.
Of course, I'm going to say it's lovely and everything is beautiful. It looks so lovely. But I feel like wedding photos are like baby photos. Every baby, lovely, perfectly lovely, great, wonderful, but they all look the same. There is medical evidence that all babies look the same. These are lovely, Chris. Oh my God, your partner looks so beautiful. Isn't that so lovely? And
thanks.
So great. But
so the best wedding present that I got was from long-time listener and my witness, Fraser. So how familiar are you with the world of theme park YouTubers, Alex Hudson?
All but zero. I'm going to confidently say zero.
Okay, so head honcho in the UK theme park world, well, arguably maybe not anymore, but certainly in nascent days of it.
So on brand.
Right.
I'm excited to hear what's about to come. Sorry.
Guy called Sean Sandbrook. Trades as Theme Park Worldwide. Lovely guy. He's very, very strange. He's very odd. His trademark, he opens every video with, hello and welcome to Theme Park Worldwide. And then he wraps every video up with, get out there and keep on riding. Because you've got to get your coaster credits in. You've got to get every single coaster that you can and get the credits and put it on your spreadsheet so that you can claim that you did all the roller coasters in the world than other people. You look really puzzled by this already.
So it just took me a second. I thought you meant beer mat or beer coaster, but no.
Roller coaster. You don't. They're not called roller coasters. They're called coasters. It's in the same way that a helicopter is actually a chopper, right? Like there's different terminology.
If you're in Top Gun, yeah.
No, but isn't it also that actually it's a copter? I mean, hang on. There is a difference. Like some people, it's one of those things where if you say helicopter, you immediately single yourself out as being kind of like a rank amateur.
Having spent a long time in the minutiae of grammar and language, I've spent an equally long time on learning that. I'm not being one of those grammar people that actually it's a semicolon, because I think that just alienates you from everyone entirely justifiably, and nobody cares that much. And also, if you care about it that much, it can be automated. Sorry, helicopters.
Well, no, I'm moving. That was a segue into my segue, or like a diversion from my diversion. So we're talking about theme park worldwide.
Yeah, but hold on. Is chopper or helicopter the right way? We can't then start it. We can't leave people hanging.
Yeah, so a helicopter is actually technically imprecise. It should be actually called a rotorcraft, says AI. So maybe AI is like.
What's the source of the AI?
This is perplexity. This is the FAA. The FAA. Helicopters. So, okay, this is like nature, where you have an overarching genus and then you have subspecies within that genus.
So roller coasters.
So a rotorcraft is the overarching thing, and then a helicopter is one type of many others, says the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States. So roller coasters, or coasters as they are technically called, because not all of them are rollers. Sean Sandbrook trades as Theme Park Worldwide on YouTube. And for my wedding day, my friend Fraser got me a cameo of him. Cameo lasts just under 2 minutes, Alex. Guess what proportion of it he spends talking about the wedding as requested by my friend Fraser, and what proportion he spends talking about his own YouTube channel and getting his plugs.
10 seconds.
far off, to be honest. A little bit more, smidgen more. He talks about the wedding, but he always reflects it back on the Theme Park Worldwide YouTube channel, which I think is the sign of a pro. Actually, like, I have to begrudgingly admit that it is quite impressive.
Is it? No, I feel like if you've already commissioned someone to do a cameo, it probably means you're already a fan of his YouTube, or at least it's either a joke that you have no idea who he is, therefore you go seek him out, or you are a mega fan of his. If you're spending, what is it, 50, 100, however much the cameo is, you know his work. So he doesn't need to do the promo. It's all about being human and personal and funny, and making sure you're doing a full Google of every word you're saying to make sure you're not falling into some Faragian idiocy trap of someone setting you up for all manner of stuff. But I am very happy for you. I'm very excited. I'm very happy you got a cameo from some bloke off YouTube. Is he? I assume he's a hero. Is he a hero?
Yeah, it depends. Not all heroes wear capes. Sean Sandbrook wears very
some
thick
heroes.
bottle glasses.
Some heroes ride roller coasters.
Yeah, right.
Before we start, I think you wanted to talk about the sort of death by selfie type stuff that's all been all over the news. So there's been a number of people dead in Middlesbrough after a police chase, and as we're recording this, there's still a lot of developing parts, and it's now a live active criminal case. There's things that we can't say and things that we can, but more broadly, the sort of things that people will do for social media.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right, obviously. So a number of arrests have been made in the case of the Middlesbrough incident, but so we won't be talking about that necessarily in specifics, but this comes after similar incidents in Ireland and so on. And Andy Burnham, many others have been talking about the need to try and tackle this at source. The idea that you see something on social media and then you copy it. Of course, we've seen this multiple times, right? Like, we've seen the Blackout Challenge, the Tide Pod Challenge, the Milk Crate Challenge. They all create this kind of like, I think even actually you might have commissioned me when you were working at Metro to write a piece about some sort of weird TikTok trend of, I can't remember what it was, horrible death situations or something like that. The ironic thing is, a lot of these kind of social media trends get G'd up and they're not actually at all connected to social media, whereas I feel like this one probably is a bit more than you would imagine. Although, the police have been saying they're not kind of looking at this as a TikTok trend problem. But there is certainly this idea of the built-in social aspect of social media, the clue there being in the name, encourages people to mimic actions and perhaps to try and push themselves to a very outlandish level that is designed to please the algorithm, while also like abstracting them from the real world impact. And it feels like that is what has happened here, at least in these recent incidents, of people kind of going, this is a TikTok dare, rather than realizing, actually, I'm driving behind the wheel of a several-ton vehicle barreling down the wrong side of the road. But I was asked a couple of times, ironically, actually, between TikTok between TikTok agreeing to settle a fine in the US for $400 million on the weekend and this, I've been asked, I think, 5 times to interrupt my wedding and the post-wedding events to go on the radio. LBC called me on the morning of the wedding as I was walking to the place and said, can you come on in 10 minutes and talk for 2 or 3 minutes about TikTok and being fined? And I said, I'm walking to my wedding right now. And she said, oh, congratulations. So can you do it or not? Which I thought was just the fantastic encapsulation of how we work as journalists. But look, I think this isn't anything new, right? Like,
of the 5, did you say yes to any of them?
No, I didn't.
Okay, then
because there wouldn't have been a wedding. We would have been talking then about how I did not, in fact, get married at the weekend.
That feels like personal growth.
You know what? It genuinely is. It's been lovely not thinking about work for 5 days, although I feel enormously out of the loop. And I did, to be fair, get back into the swing of things on Tuesday quite significantly.
Yeah, we're recording this between your wedding and your honeymoon, so it shows you're not really letting go that much. Yeah. But there is growth. There is still growth to go. On the anti-algorithm stuff, given that we're actually recording this in chronological order, which is rare, given I've already done the intro, should talk about Vine and Divine, the new rehash of, and the sort of the end of the algorithm. So there was a lot of chat, I think it was on a New York Times podcast I was listening to, around this idea of the late end stage algorithm, where actually people are reacting badly to it, and we're working away from that. And then Divine, which is a Vine, the 6-second video app, someone's redone it, and it's been funded by Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, and So the 6-second videos are back. And I went on the app. My God, it's just people who work there. There's not a lot of original content for now. But it explicitly makes sure that you can't use any AI. And there's lots of, they're making really clear that it's less algorithm, more human, and all AI stuff will be taken down, which is exciting, Chris, or it feels like it's not. When did it, maybe 2015, 2016, when Vine really got going?
Yeah, yes. I mean, it got going, I think, 2013, 2014, 2015. It kind of all exploded mid to late 2010s. Infamously, a bunch of Vine creators stormed into the offices and basically said, you need to pay us each $1 million in order to remain on this platform. Otherwise, we're walking to YouTube. And they included people like Jake and Logan Paul. And Vine chose not to, and then lost all of their audience shortly thereafter to YouTube, where those creators ended up.
I think it's way more complicated than that, surely.
Yeah, no, a little bit, but like
the lack of iteration, the lack of algorithmic, the minute limitations of either 6-second or full live. The live was a fucking messy UX that didn't really make any sense. They didn't put the money behind it. Twitter that then owned the platform really didn't know what to do with it. It's not just that Logan Paul demanded some money.
No, but it's
and or Jake Paul.
No, it still struggled, I think, from that loss, and it was interesting to see how little actually the original folks at Vine, when they were presented with that fait accompli, realized how much of online creator space is built on personal relationships and personal recognition. Because, like, in hindsight, that would have been a really easy bargain. Now, yes, you would have had then a queue of subsequent creators knocking on your door asking for the same amount or slightly less, depending on their standing. And at what point do you then draw the line and say, well, we're paying you lot, but we're not paying anybody else? But this could have been a massive, massive thing. In terms of Divine, which is a horrible, horrible word, by the way, a horrible name for an app, like it's just the worst thing in the world. Like, it's not going to work, right? Like, sorry, it's just not going to work. It's an attempt to try and resuscitate a long dead brand that got rapidly outmoded by the stuff that followed it, and some random former Twitter employee choosing to try and make a new Vine just doesn't really work for me. Like, Vine was very much of its time. It was of its moment. It was different because it was doing short form video, but like really short form video, and doing it in quite a mimetic way. Like, one of the things that I think makes Vine very much of its time was it came at a point when people were still trying to figure out how you build both a sense of community and a sense of belonging and a sense of identity, and hit the Venn diagram between those three circles in a way that now is very innate to pretty much everybody, right? Like, you're part of that.
I think the one thing I will say on it is that there is a lot of creative energy across all of the major tech companies around what makes something more live, what makes something feel more real, what's that backlash to the AI slop. And so if you look at the whatever the hell that new Instagram thing is, where you take an immediate photo and it just instantly posts, and it's horrible and it's pointless and no one's really using it yet. There is, on opening up Divine this morning to try and look out what it was, there was something pure and lovely about the lack of commercial imperative and the lack of well-polished people doing well-polished things. It was chaotic and silly. So I think there's that what works in its favor, and there is a lot of capital and audience in this sort of post-authentic, post-algorithmic age of just making stuff that is interesting, that doesn't find you because the three keywords that you're most likely to click on for more than 50% come up. There is something in that. Divine isn't it. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think they're on the right sort of, well, maybe that's Vine was in the first place. Vine was on its way to becoming TikTok and then it messed it all up. Divine, there is something in the kernel of what it wants to be of authenticity and real and avoiding AI and avoiding algorithms, but in its current iteration, it just won't work.
No, and it kind of feels like the blue sky. I'm going to now get to so much hate on social media, I can tell. We were talking about this earlier in terms of, you thought I would get hate for TikTok stuff. I think I'll get hate for this. It's like the blue sky of online video, right? Like it wants to be different, and it has a spirit that is interesting, but that spirit becomes just stultifying and like naturally limits its ability to go mainstream, to scale up.
So what I heard from that is that Chris is morally and entirely polarized opposed to all blockchain technology and anything around Web3 decentralizing of ownership of data. He really hates it, and he wants everyone who loves it to get in touch with him, because I think that's where his passion's really laid, hating all Web3 technologies.
You know, the Las Vegas is a very interesting city, and the worst time that I had in Las Vegas was walking around an NFT gallery in downtown Las Vegas. It was just horrific. Just seeing, God, what even were they? Bored Ape Yacht Club images.
Something will come of it. We don't know what it is yet. Decentralizing of data and the shifting into self-sovereign identity and self-sovereign ownership of data is where we're going to end up. Can someone please make it not shit? Anyway, so much of this will be cut out because we've been speaking for like 20 minutes. So we should probably move on to an actual thing that we are at least slightly researching talking about. The UK government has promised an AI military cell to get ahead in automated warfare. Britain now has access to Ukraine's Avengers AI labs, where millions of battlefield images are analysed to identify tanks, artillery systems, drones, and other military targets, and to train AI systems. That's sort of its primary goal. This partnership is to jointly develop AI tools for defence and security, but the story isn't really that it's developing defence AI or even that classified information is being released to help Ukraine build long-range missiles. And it definitely isn't Prime Minister Andy Burnham playing Smith's covers on the guitar with soldiers. If you haven't seen that video, don't bother. But the story is that Ukraine's most valuable technology export seems to be, at least for the moment, the data gathered after it was invaded. So Ukraine has already become the world's most recorded war and a laboratory for AI-driven combat. So that's according to the International Policy Digest. And according to Congressman Pat Harrigan, 80% of Russian casualties in Ukraine are caused by low-cost software-defined drones, though precise numbers on that are actually tricky to stand up. And it's probably over half, but no military expert will be drawn on really precise figures. Human experience has become the input for these war games for an AI to learn from. First, focusing on defense and national security. So, Chris, is data the new currency of war? What on earth is going on?
What's been so interesting about the Ukraine conflict, in amongst all the horror, is that it's been just this kind of real life testing ground for effectively the future of warfare. And we do have an awful lot of data points that indicate how the old way of fighting is just completely outdated. Now, I don't really understand how that then applies to elsewhere. Like, what benefit do we have from knowing how better to target everyday drones and soup them up to become like fighting machines? Like, how does that translate into improving your train times or whatever it is that Andy Burnham is saying this is going to do? That's where I don't understand quite how this works. I guess we'll have to trust him and Wes Streeting on that. But like, the idea of this partnership is great, because Ukraine has become this real military power in modern day warfare. It's probably Israel and Ukraine who have the most expertise in how to actually fight a 21st century conflict. Unfortunately for them, because of the fact that they've had to be compelled to learn very quickly by what Russia has been doing to them over the last 4 years or so, 4.5 years now.
Trying to answer your question around what Britain stands to gain, I think it is in those war games, and it is in, albeit I'm sure we're going to talk about the semi-automated level of warfare that we're currently in, but if it's in humans at their most life or death situations, what are their choices? How do they choose to act? Where do they move? Where are the commanders moving these things into place? And I think there's a question around actually now that's semi-automated in a way that the stock market, after machines got involved, became less predictable, because machines are more inventive and more innovative and make rasher or more different decisions than humans do. Humans are inherently predictable. So the more human data you have in this or in any sphere, actually, the more predictable it becomes. So if you can predict warfare, you can have better outcomes. It feels really macabre discussing this in such a cold way when there literally thousands of people have died. But it's making a deal so that you have access to the best real life data, so then you can check your war games, you can check your calculations, you can check your simulations to make sure they actually show what is happening in the real world in 2026, because so much of sort of active warfare is this thing that is behind a computer screen. So, but I think your point around how it can help Britain more broadly, I think that is just to make it seem slightly less like they've just bought in the future of AI warfare, saying like, yes, but think about when all the trains are public. Look at this. Look at all of the infrastructure that we will help. It feels like it's great for the UK infrastructure and great for UK defence businesses. I don't know how it helps the public sector or infrastructure necessarily.
But is it great for UK defence businesses? Because I was thinking about this. We talked when Tom Forth was on about the importance of BAE Systems and other companies like that, the northwest of England. I was talking about Vickers Shipyard to Austrian relatives who were over this weekend for my wedding, about the importance of, at one point, I think Vickers employed like just a ridiculous proportion of people in Newcastle upon Tyne. It was where the armaments that were used in the Second World War came from, and they travelled down the Tyne. The extent to which, I'm yet to be convinced how a BAE or something like that, which is incredibly skilled at producing fighter jets and tanks and things like that, can then transform into a kind of nimble drone factory. In large part not just because they're skilled in one thing and their skills aren't transferable, but also in terms of temperament, right? So like, I was speaking to Ukraine. Sorry, this is the joy of journalism, as I can say. I was speaking to a Ukrainian war general a little while back, and he sent me some fun pictures of things that they were planning, and was like, "Don't send anybody these because these are fun looking." And like it's a lot of the Ukrainian military industrial complex has been established from very nimble startups, right? It's people who are like the brothers that I went and saw in Odessa in 2014, ironically the last time that Russia tried it on with Ukraine, who had built like productivity apps that led the App Store, realizing that the future of their country was at stake and putting their time and efforts into trying to produce military technology for this sort of stuff. It's not your sleek-suited former lieutenant colonel who was very high-ranking and went to Sandhurst and then went over to take a job in BAE when he decided he didn't want to do square bashing anymore, talking about the latest...
Square bashing?
That's where you just walk around, you do marching.
I see.
Full of words. I'm full of words, Alex. The one thing that I have is words. Nothing else but words. They're not the same, right? And so I don't understand how a nimble, bottom-up, startup, scrappy mentality maps onto what we have in the UK, which is a hulking, slow-moving, very difficult to turn around cargo ship of military expertise.
Of course, all of that is correct. I think trying to take on big defense and big arms is a little bit like trying to take on big tech. In that same way, they're just going to get bought up. But if you take, so this is Navarre reporting. So again, it's coming from a left to centre, broadly speaking, anti-war rhetoric. But they say that Burnham addressed an arms fair attended by an Israeli weapons firm, while his new defence secretary, Wes Streeting, promised military spending would take priority over other areas. And what Burnham has said is that military spending he wants to increase from 2.6% of GDP to 3.5%, which is pretty high historically, sort of levels similar to the Cold War, and absolute number not the same, but the percentage of GDP is the same. And so it's not necessarily about like you say, like startup culture, sort of where we sit most comfortably is in the sort of tech AI tech startup space. But this is more just making sure that the beer moths that the UK does have behind it are maintained and allowed to grow. And this level of data, albeit again, I feel so weird to be so cold about this level of like, here's the data on how many people have died. Obviously there is a price on it. There is a price that is being paid, but it allows them to be at least up to speed with the US and other big firms, because the UK is the only country so far that's been allowed access to this data in this partnership.
I mean, that's important, right? That we are the only country. Do you think that we will remain the only country, or do you think
No.
actually, yeah? So then we lose the supremacy, right? We're never going to be remaining one step ahead here.
I think the moment that Trump leaves office, whenever that might be, that it would be big surprise if deals with Ukraine and the US weren't really, really quick in any new administration. But okay, let me ask you a more sort of philosophical, deep question. I was trying to figure it out in my own head this morning about when does human in the loop around the semi-automation and this data. So if this sort of this 80% figure of drone attacks isn't necessarily true, it's all political rhetoric, but there's a large proportion of drone attacks and deaths by drone bombs, even if a human is at least looped into the decision making, if not directly making the decision. Do you know how closely a human still is into that loop? And when do you think militaries will start being comfortable with autonomous killing of soldiers?
Yeah. I mean, I think currently we are much in the same sort of situation that we were broadly 20 years ago, right? When we were seeing the US and the UK and allies fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, where you had the use of drones, but they were still piloted by a human being, albeit remotely, and the kind of horror of the distance that provides from what you are doing, which is taking a life, and it becomes almost just like a video game. I think what we seem to be at is a kind of like in between stage. So from what I can gather from, again, the reporting that's out there, you have now the ability for one human drone commander to oversee simultaneously multiple drones, like in a swarm, or just kind of like with semi-autonomy, but actually still making kind of the final decisions in every process. I find it difficult to envisage a point at the minute where that goes fully autonomous, because I think that becomes just like a very worrying moment for humanity. And ironically, because of a lot of the fears, the concerns, and the kind of G'd up debate that we've seen around AGI, around superintelligence, and the idea of kind of runaway artificial intelligence causing chaos by these big tech labs, I'm not so convinced that there will be an easy handover to allow just free reign for these sorts of things, because people are worried about it, rightly or wrongly. And actually, maybe that's one of the consequences of the big AI labs talking a good game about LLMs, is it makes us think actually these things can't and shouldn't be trusted just to do stuff by themselves.
So in June, which is the last data we have available to us, there was an average of over 6,600 drone attacks per day, which works out as just over 200,000. That's in June 2026, which is absolutely entirely terrifying in that if that is happening, I think the 200,000 number this was put out by the Ukrainian government. So I think the 200,000 is a very nice round number. But that this is just how warfare is. And because it is so, even though it is on Europe's shores, it feels so distant to the US, it feels so distant to the UK, and even to an extent the EU. I don't think we know the realities of war, even if this is the most recorded war in history. It's still, we're being heavily insulated from it. And so I think if 6,600 drone hits are happening per day, that is astounding. Like the idea there being 6,000 missiles being fired every day is beyond my comprehension. I don't fully understand what that means for any future conflict.
And that's the worry, right? Is it all becomes very remote very quickly. And you look at the urgency with which the media covered the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the way in which this was brought home to us nightly. I remember Clive Myrie, James Waterhouse standing on a rooftop in Kyiv, seeing the drones streaking across the sky, seeing the missiles arriving, and taking cover because of the alerts that were going out, in the days before and then the days after the incursion into Russia. And that's all gone now. A lot of time has passed and a lot of things have happened in the interim. But there is that idea of out of sight, out of mind, and it's difficult as journalists to make people care about this, right? Because there are only so many times that you can tell the story of, hey, isn't this awful? Without just exhausting your audience. I mean, I don't know, like, you think deeply about the media and how we cover things. Like, is there a way, do you think, that this could be done? Should we actually be having this stuff pumped into our feeds through social media, even just a sanitized version, so we know at least it's there, even if we don't see the blood and the guts and the aftermath?
I think on that, if you take the algorithms as just as a news vehicle, so if you're on a specific news app, I think you could make the argument. If you're just wanting to scroll TikTok to watch some cute animal content or some babies jumping on trampolines or hearing for the first time that shit every time, damn it, algorithm. Then I think cute cat, cute dog, something about kittens. Oh yeah, wait, here's some war crimes. I don't think that is. I think that is not in the interest of those apps. Is not in the interest of. I think widening understanding is a framing issue, is a lack of funding within the news industry, and a real lack of understanding around appointment content and around that idea of having an edition of a thing that you at least see the headlines of everything, and that is a whole different complication. I think people have very short attention spans. I think people get bored quickly, and I also think war is quite a repetitive business. Like, things move in meters or in at most hundreds of meters and inches at a time. No, centimeters at a time. Stop going back to old money. And so it's meant to be long. It's meant to be grudging. It's this horrible thing, and we become so desanitized those images, partly through film, partly through the seeing the horrors of this in the early stages. I don't know that we can unless there's fundamental change. And it's a balancing act, because if the EU really wanted to intervene and try and move this forward, it's super high risk. If the US or the UK wanted to intervene, it's super high risk. And there's so much diplomacy going in to make sure it doesn't slip over into what, even though I think some have argued that this is already a world war because the entire world is involved with it in some way, but before it slips over into a full-scale globalized conflict in a way that is so far avoided, it means that it is going to be dry, it is going to be boring, it is going to be a slog to make people care about this thing.
But is there a way to tell the story of war? And again, I'm conscious of how callous and detached that sounds, but unfortunately that is what we have to do, because it has a better aim ultimately of trying to make people pay more attention. Is there a way of telling that story of war that can make people care and avoid that kind of just fatigue around this?
I think yes and no. I was in Vietnam at the Vietnam War exhibition, and actually looking at the way that a lot of those photos changed how that war was perceived in the US. And just that imagery of this absolutely shocking, that moment that captures attention, I think there is still power in those images. And if you take the image of that Alan Kurdi, that small toddler washed up dead on the beach, it was now maybe 7 years ago. For that brief period, suddenly the entire refugees on boats and the migrant crisis changed tact. But then, 6 months later, 12 months later, if you look at the current rhetoric at the moment, that's not a permanent change. And so it has to be additive. And so I think because of the infinite media available to us, I don't think it can be a permanent change. And I also think news organizations can, in a way that wasn't true 50 years ago, can look at the numbers of people watching, numbers of people reading, how long they're reading for, and what they're choosing to read around the war coverage, because it is incredibly expensive to do, it's incredibly dangerous to do, and my God, it is vital, and there is so much public interest in making sure it is done. But financially, for the best running of that business, is for the most part, if they're a commercial business, there is little justification to doing so. And it matters and it has to be done, but there is no financial justification for doing so. I just think if we're going to turn the tide of this, getting more and more people onto the ground is high risk. But again, there are fewer and fewer human stories to this, because so much of the warfare is automated. And so if a drone is firing on these people, you're not close enough to them to be able to get those human stories out of it. And then you're left with this cold tragedy day after day of war. I don't think we can do it. And I think politically, making sure people either care enough that you can still fund it, or of ignoring it enough they don't see the amount of money we're spending on these things is the balancing act. And currently that's doing quite well. Like, that Ukraine feels like it is being served effectively, but journalistically, I don't know how we keep reporting it effectively.
Grim.
It's going to be a grim pro. I'm going to talk about how automation is also not just intervening in warfare, but also is intervening in the workplace. We'll be back in 1 second. Welcome back, and you will never hear us talk about Andy Burnham's guitar skills because that was done in the break. If you want a ridiculously well-paid job in this jobs market where graduate job opportunities in the UK have halved in a year, according to Adzuna, then we might have the solution for you. If you're a recent grad with a MacBook, $60 an hour to be recorded doing postgrad work. If you're a design expert, $180 an hour. There's $100 an hour for a northern voice actor, $100 an hour for a communications evaluator, $160 for an in-house counsel, all available in the UK, all immediate starts, and all to train AI models. The job is to teach AI to do your job and to use your professional judgment to teach a machine how to have better professional judgment. And in the case of the voice actor, your voice will then be cloned and it will belong to the client. So there's already a large and growing market in teaching frontier models how the world works away from publicly available or licensable data. And with all this talk of AI coming for our jobs and the assumption that the automated workforce would learn from everything we already know, it turns out that humans are just being hired as teachers, at least until the AI knows everything, and then will we still need to keep paying it? I don't know. Chris, would you take £150 an hour to teach an AI to be a journalist just like you?
No, it's turkeys voting for Christmas, right? And there are really worrying developments here in the sense of this is becoming a booming industry. So I've spoken for a story that hopefully should be out shortly in Fast Company's print edition to several people who run these AI training companies who say they are seeing demand outstrip supply. So AI companies looking to contract them and their experts to train these AI systems are coming at that front door quicker than the people who are able to actually supply the training for them. So you can make payola right now if you want on this. The problem is you're probably hastening your decline in the long run through the short-term gain that you might get financially as well.
Do you have a price? Is there a price that suddenly that per hour, if you're guaranteed it for at least a month, suddenly that would become attractive to you?
I mean, if it's retirable income in terms of like I can then just give up, then sure. But I also enjoy my job too much, so I wouldn't want to give it up. I mean, there are ridiculous amounts that people are being paid for these sorts of things. You can get hundreds of dollars in the United States if you've got specialist skills. I spoke to a lawyer, for instance, who was helping train systems. He runs one of the biggest subreddits that talks about AI training jobs. Basically saying that there are kind of several buckets that these people fall into. One is I think I am going to be replaced, and I'm okay with that because actually I'm near the end of my career or whatever, and I see the way that the tide is turning, and it's pointless for me to try and stop that as one person alone. There are those who are tech curious. They like the idea of this as a kind of concept, and they think it would be quite cool to learn about this. They also believe that actually, it's almost their duty to try and educate people through the AI. So they teach the AI, and then they hope that the AI will teach other people. And then there are those who are doing this as a kind of philosophical game, and they often tend to be the academics who are being asked to put down their expertise into an AI system, to an LLM or whatever it is, through training it, who are doing it through a very abstract way, and because of that feel able to almost just remove themselves from the whole process and not to think about the nasty sort of financial, economic impacts of it all.
The thing that I'm still trying to figure out is, so I've always argued, and I was on the Tech Report last week, and then I got called an AI shill afterwards. Thanks, YouTube, for being like, probably prompts are fine. And if it's AI slop, it's probably just you're not prompting it effectively. And there is really interesting stuff with augmenting. And I don't want to get back into that. Don't come for me. I've had enough. There was so many comments. Whatever I said, I'm really sorry. Lawyers wise, not really sorry. But there is that element of, I don't know, because AI was always meant to come in and augment employment, right? So it's going to come in and it's going to mean you're 3 times as efficient, or you could do something twice as good or twice as quick, or you could produce a podcast in 1/5 of the time, but it would be as human generated. Is this part of that, or does this feel like it is you are training to directly replace? And can those two things coexist?
I think they can coexist for a short space of time, but I'm not so sure that they can in the long term, because ultimately, if, as we've seen in the early advent of the use of LLMs across the workspace, some jobs have been displaced, some jobs have been changed materially by the use of AI. And it's not just a case of temporary stuff, and this feels like it is much more permanent. So, yeah, I don't really buy that, to be honest. I think that this is a fundamental change that is really worrying for the long run, because it play through the ramifications of that. If you don't then have the kind of career path that you might have imagined even just 5 years ago now, where do you learn the formative skills that allow you to progress through the career path? How do you get up that ladder? What's the consequence of all of this? I'm not sure that that's been fully thought through yet, and that's the thing that I think is a little bit worrying for me.
I think on that particular, I think so. In the intro, of course, I made a sort of joke about AI, and actually, the jobs market, it's those numbers about 47%. It depends on which market research company you talk to. That's the high number, because we're journalists. We always pick the big numbers, but it's not really necessarily about AI. It's about national insurance contribution, tax tweaks, weak labour markets, productivity flattening, or green shoots of new productivity growth, apparently, according to the most recent research, which we'll see. But it feels like AI is getting a lot of the blame where actually it shouldn't necessarily do. I'm not an AI shill. But I think all of the warnings are entirely fair. All of the fears about what could happen is entirely fair. The fact that AI companies are willing to pay thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars and pounds to make it learn is terrifying. But the fundamental lack of jobs, particularly for young people in the jobs market, has little to do with AI. I think that and maybe by the time that's recovered, by that point, then AI models will suddenly be able to do the work of a junior, and then that means they will never get into the workplace, given that they're not in employment, education, and training numbers are getting towards record highs, and that's slightly terrifying. And no one has a really simple solution for that.
But that's not just a tech problem, right? And this is one of the challenges. Is it's this idea that tech is always just exacerbating the pre-existing issues that we have within society, right? So
now you're an AI shill.
Apparently, right? But it is still, I think, important to acknowledge that, right? We often think of, if we think back to the conversation that we started with, the idea of the TikTok trend kind of causing these problems. Yes, we need to have very serious chats with TikTok about the consequences of allowing people to try and promote dangerous skits online. But yes, also we need to have conversations with all of us as humans to say, you have agency here as well. Like, it's not just that you are being pushed in one way. You can also say, actually, I choose not to engage in this in some way. I choose to do something else. And it feels like, particularly that NEAT problem, the not in education, employment or training issue, we often say, well, that's clearly AI's fault. And yet it was pre-existing before the advent of ChatGPT. Admittedly, it's got worse since then. But we think of this as just, if we get rid of the AI, we try and wind the clock back somehow using Berners' watch, that this all goes away. And it doesn't, right? This is a more fundamental, really significant issue.
I think the fun existential question, which could be a question which there is no answer to, but I'm already prepped, is, I think, with all of this stuff training the AI models, I think this is a wider issue of who is programming the AI models, what truth is in these worlds. So if I've paid my lawyer £100,000 to teach it how to be a lawyer, how sure are we that lawyer knows the law? Or like how many lawyers, how many journalists, how many designers, how many voice actors do you need before suddenly it becomes the wisdom of crowds that overcomes individual prejudices? Or does it then take on the role of, like, the inbuilt prejudices of society become the inbuilt prejudices of AI models? Who decide how many people do you need before you can decide what good means? And how much are AI companies willing to pay to make sure that they are finding the truth rather than one person's version of it?
I mean, That's the problem, right? And the reason why this exists is to try and augment the massive sweep of the web that comes from the common core that is the training data for AI systems, right? They're
Just
injecting
Reddit.
well, but also not, right? Because Reddit has kind of turned off the ability for AI LLMs, at least, to gain access to it. They've changed the process of logging into old.reddit.com in order to try and stop inauthentic behavior accessing and then just scraping the websites. And as a result of that, there's just been an enormous drop in the number of citations of Reddit within LLM responses, which is on one hand a good thing because Reddit isn't always right. But on the other hand, they do sort of claim to be the front page of the internet, and they are a useful proxy for the topics of conversation that most people care about online and offline.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. But then I was researching a story and I was trying to find something super quick for a fact, just meant to do the research in its site. And the Google AI summary quoted just an Instagram user without any context as being this truthful answer. Like, hold on, come on.
Here's the importance of journalists, right? Is that we're able to recognize you can't just cite a random Instagrammer. You have to actually have some veracity to it.
Actually find the truth in the truth. So how I would accept if someone wants to pay me £1,000 an hour to teach an LLM how to do whatever the hell it is that I know how to do, figure that out. I will. I think, and if I was maybe 15 years older, like you said, I think I would definitely then actually. There is something in the. I can see how there's that sort of legacy back of the mind. I'm helping build the future thing. At the moment, as we've discussed on Crash a few times, like young people are so terrified that there is that replacement. There is no way to grow into this because the bottom rung is being removed by these machines. I can see how almost it's that inverse where usually old people are scared of new tech and young people are like, I can make my career from this. Older people have made their career from this and therefore can leverage whatever value there is left. And young people have no way to make money or make a career in the first place. But again, I think blaming AI for this situation that we're in wholesale and blaming LLMs for this wholesale is just fundamentally flawed. I think by the time that the underlying factors are fixed, then that then risks actually AI being the genuine reason for that, and then there being an entire lost generation of people without the way to get into the workforce, and that's scary and almost a really difficult circle to square for Burnham to make work.
Yeah, I do feel ironically sorry for a lot of the current crop of politicians because they're being dealt this thing that is arguably world changing, right? And having to deal with the consequences of it without themselves really knowing what actually happens.
Well, if you would build safety nets and you would end precarity and you would engage more in the idea that empathy and care is a strength, not a weakness, and building out the reframing so that becomes politically accessible, acceptable, and a vote-winning exercise rather than shifting within the Overton window rather than to move it. I think there are solutions to it, and you can get into the deep weeds around what that is and just how far down the safety net. And I think the new Labour government called it a springboard rather than a safety net. I think that might be Milburn in the interim Milburn report findings. But ultimately, without a safety net and a springboard, the productivity crisis maintains. And that the way to solve it is not just soften yourself by talking about 9 a.m. pints in an airport pub somewhere, thanks, Chancellor. It's to get to grips with the knotty bit of making some of these policies politically acceptable and vote winning. And I think it can be done. I think a lot of Westminster knows what the suite of answers are. Making them into reality is the difficulty, and that's just politics. I take your point around the fact that this is unprecedented. We keep saying that, and I think things are moving more quickly. But the underlying way to make sure to remove the precarity from a precarious population are the same as they ever were. It's just the political appetites goes in peaks and troughs.
Yeah. Not trendy, therefore we don't really care about it.
We were going to have a light episode. Well, no. What about war? What about the future of work? And maybe have some fun with it. But no, we've ended up with existential crisis about the death of politics. So we'll continue the existential crises and try answer some questions that have no answer. Back in 1 second. Welcome back to the final part of Crashed. 2 questions to which there are no answers. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Why not?
Mix it up.
Yeah, I'm I'm linking it to what we started the episode with in terms of the TikTok discussion. I guess I'm intrigued to learn whether social media companies ought to be responsible for what people do offline because of the content that their algorithms promote. Like, where does the line of responsibility end here?
Cheers. Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the whole point of this section is meant to be impossible. I don't think that platforms have a responsibility for offline actions until they are posted online, in which case they have a duty of care and all manner of different things to make sure that those things aren't rewarded with the algorithm. And I think you get into deep conversations around Section 230 and around freedom of speech, First Amendment, around what platforms should and should not be responsible for. This is an impossible question, and I hate you a little bit because I think you can't hold the platforms responsible for things that people do offline, because otherwise so many young people want to be YouTubers, so many young people want to be influencers. And I think there's a societal issue around making that seem less. No, fuck it. Everyone wanted to be a footballer. Now everyone wants to be a YouTuber. Kids are meant to have ridiculous dreams. Fine, but making it so that, in a way that so many of the football clubs now all take people through private school, and once they take kids in at like 8, 9, 10 years old, they give them an education the moment they sign them until they turn 18. So they're within that education system, even if they're dropped 6 months, 12 months after. So there is that duty of care for a football club. And so I think within the education system, if this kid somehow gets viral or this young person goes viral or whatever, that means that there has to be something. I've got no idea what that could be, because it can't be on social networks as you've gone viral, you get access to this private school. If you're not watching this, Chris is badly typing because he didn't know that about football clubs. He's already formulating a story that he's going to pitch out. I can see that. I can see the brain whirring. You're going on honeymoon in like 2 days. You don't have time. But it's a couple of Premier League clubs do it all the way through. All football clubs do it when you're in part of it. Chris writing a football story. I hope I get a credit. I will take my finder's fee. So there can't be a duty of care. I think it is on communities, it is on societies, it is on education systems to equip young people with enough critical thinking and enough understanding of the way the system works. And there is a key argument, and I think so many people make this, including Dr. Are, who we've had on here a number of times, about the transparency of those algorithms, so you can know what will work and won't. And then academics and experts can root through them and say, actually, this doesn't feel right to me, or this doesn't feel right. That's where the work is. But directly in online, offline, you try to legislate for that. If you figure that one out, let me know. You try and answer that impossible question.
No, I can't. That's why I asked it. I wanted you to.
Fair enough. My question to you is, are the newest AI models now in the superhuman domain?
No, they're not. And so, I mean, a perfect good example of this is there is a model that kind of has got people very excited at the minute on X in particular, which is being accessible through open code and a few other little platforms and providers called Ox Alpha. Nobody knows which model it actually is. So open code releases access to models early for testing purposes. Ox Alpha is one of those that's been released. People have free access to it for a week or so to use it as much as they want. And there's often this guessing game of, can you try and figure out which major lab is about to release a new model? Looks like it's probably a GLM model, which includes vision capabilities. That comes from ZAI. They do quite a lot of interesting stuff. But they're not at the point of being kind of super intelligent. Like, I've been trying it, and actually it's okay, it's good, but we've got quite discerning in a very short space of time in terms of, we now think of these things as picking the errors out rather than championing the things that they do really well. So I don't think we're at that point yet. I think that, again, we're at a facsimile of these sorts of things, and they're decent, but they're still really naive in many ways. And actually, the more that we use these models in very complex tasks, the more you start to realize where the vulnerabilities lie, where the issues are.
So a New York Times piece published on Tuesday included a quote from Palisade Research Director Jeffrey Ladish saying we're in that era now. I think my favorite quote from that piece was Katie Masuris, who's from Luta Security. And she said, it's like Marie Curie handling radium with her bare hands. We're handling AI with our bare hands, and we don't know how to contain it, let alone how to safely test it. And I think the latest quote, they're the only two words that are in that whole piece from them. So it implies that the subs are really looking for a good headline and they found it. But it feels like people are talking their own book. I think the superhuman thing is, it's coming. It really, but I think we will get there without it being announced by one of the major LLMs. It will hit a critical mass at some point, and we won't be prepared for it. I don't think it will come from OpenAI, Anthropic, or anyone else's press release, to be honest.
It definitely won't do that. I mean, look, and this is part of the problem, is that we probably won't know if it does happen, but also we've been so inured to the idea of this can happen because people are just going so eagerly into saying our tech is the best thing since sliced bread, that it becomes like the boy who cried wolf, effectively.
We're going to go, and then I think we're going to record another podcast now. So we're idiots. This should never happen. Anyway, Crash is Everything Popular Wrong Production. Follow us wherever you want. Do so, though. Follow. Title music from Nuffer. Stream them. Hosted by Acast. It's by Riverside Studios. We're published on Thursday mornings. Email alex@crash.org.uk, chris@crash.uk. We are entirely transparent and open with how we work, so get in touch. We'll probably use your emails. Follow us on the social. If you want to support the podcast, go to crash.substack.com, and we'll be back next week.